Welcome to Pitch It To Me Podcast, a show about the subjective past, present, and potential future of Flesh and Blood design. Remember, the real allies were the friends we made along the way.
Aww.
Today's episode will be all about allies. On Red Pitch, Joel will take stock of the ally situation. On Yellow Pitch, Clark will give some soft suggestions for how allies could be better in the future. And on Blue Pitch, Fuzzy will brainstorm some ally designs for other classes. You can find us across all socials such as TikTok and Instagram at Pitch It To Me Podcast.
I'm Joel.
I'm Fuzzy.
And I'm Clark.
That's it?
Yeah? Yeah, that's it. I said my name. What more do you want from me?
So for this episode, we're going to preface it with sort of like a warning, but not really. While we're discussing the polarity of allies, we as a group agreed that it's, I don't want to say toxic because I feel like that word's like overused, but it is overbearing and a little overwhelming for a lot of the heroes in Flesh and Blood as it stands.
Allies can feel really scary when you're sitting across from them.
Yeah, so we're kind of operating on the assumption that they're not good for the game, and we're going to explore how, like, if at all, we can keep them in the game and make them a little bit healthier.
Yeah, and still at the end of the day, we all think that allies are important for the game. They have a role in this game. We are definitely not of the opinion of, like, Illusionist was a mistake, cut it from the game entirely, never reprint these heroes ever again.
Well, I think Joel might literally believe that.
I wouldn't go that far.
But we definitely think that allies have their place. They can be done in a healthy way, and so we're also going to be exploring that as well. You may just hear a bit more of a negative tint throughout the episode of, like, what isn't working.
Mm-hmm.
And you might not necessarily agree, but maybe this episode will kind of convince you, or if you have your own ideas and you like really think we're off base, that's okay too. We would love to hear about that in the comments or on our Discord. And speaking of engagement, when I kind of first started this podcast, I was really excited at the idea of like continuously shouting out the stuff that people were engaging with the episode, but we kind of need a follower base to do that. We're just getting to the point where I can actually say things like, hey, I want to hear what everyone thinks and talk about it on the show. So to kind of start that, I have a little bit of a prompt for you all. On Blue Pitch, I'm going to be giving some ally designs for heroes and other classes and what that might possibly look like. And I would love to hear your takes for what an ally could look like. I want to hear your custom ideas for allies, and I'll take a couple of my favorites and shout them out at a future Turn Zero in another episode. Probably not the one immediately following this because of the way we record, but maybe episode like 27 or 28. If you give me your ally designs, I'll shout them out. It'll be great.
Yeah. You can leave those in the YouTube comments, in our Discord, another Discord plug. You could tweet at us. You could email us at Pitch It To Me Podcast. There's tons of ways of sort of sharing that with us, and we're really open to collecting everything. Check in towards the end of the episode for more details on exactly what we're looking for.
Stick around, listen to Blue Pitch, and I'll tell you all about it.
All right, with all that being said, I think we should jump into Red Pitch. Joel, tell us all about it.
I'd love to, Clark. We're going to be beating the same horse to death for a while. That's the saying, right? Beat a horse, a dead horse? Yeah, okay. So
it's not beating it to death. It's beating it because it's already dead. That's where the phrase comes from, right?
Beating a dead horse to death, yeah. That's what I said. Allies in Flesh and Blood so far have really taken place largely through the Illusionists, OG Prism, and Dromai with the Spectra Auras and Dragon allies respectively. And I think this is like the most glaring example of like what I feel is the antithesis of Flesh and Blood. Like I think it really goes against a lot of the design with like the access to free go again and you know the difficult to deal with nature. And I guess we can go a little bit into like why they're toxic. I think largely because there's a lack of interaction. Like Phantasm, I feel, is more so a red herring, and it's not like an actual real downside. Because the heroes with bad matchups into Illusionists or like with bad action point economy suffer even more than probably they originally designed. Because like sixes or like 6 power attack actions that are not Illusionist are pretty hard to come by unless you are a class that predominantly deals with those types of cards. So a card that already lacks these cards going against a class with an entire board like a 4 or 5 auras or dragons, it can feel, well, it would be impossible to like clear all the auras without, or dragons, without the other player creating more and making it like kind of like a sinkhole. You know what I mean?
Like Illusionist feels like they kind of get the best of both worlds. You kind of have classes roughly on a spectrum where they're either go wide with lots of action points, or they're go tall with lots of high power, 6+ power cards. Illusionist has these Phantasm cards where if they're defended by something with 6 or more power, then they're destroyed, and Illusionists supposedly are like, no, my cards, you destroyed it. That was so easy to defend for you. But if they make a lot of these auras with Spectra, then you can't clear them out unless you have a lot of action points.
And action points, not even go again, right?
Right.
Like, Prism was definitely the worst offender of this, even though we don't think of Prism as, like, an ally hero, because OG Prism certainly wasn't. It was all auras. The Spectra auras functioned a lot like allies.
Right.
They were both the source of these, like, multiple small go-again attacks, but then it also took your entire turn to clear them.
Right.
Way easier for her to put them down.
Right. And so you'd often see, and maybe this is due to how young Flesh and Blood was at the time, because the only way to deal with like multiple auras on the field would be to roll Scapsing Leathers as a brute, or run Time Skippers as like a guardian or another class just to get 2 action points and throw like, you know, your valuable attack actions at these Spectre cards. And that's less cards out of your deck, like you're losing threat density as you're dealing with them. So it can be, you know, a lot to deal with.
Allies definitely seem to also go against the like basic idea of how Flesh and Blood was sold to us, which is why I think a lot of people struggle against them. Like, James White will say this even in interviews today of like Flesh and Blood is all about starting at your strongest and getting weaker throughout the game. And that was so wonderful in stark contrast to where most Flesh and Blood players came from, which was Magic the Gathering, which is all about starting at your weakest and then building up a nice big board state.
Right.
And now here we are in Flesh and Blood where we have been sold, no, it's the opposite. You're going to start at your strongest and get weaker throughout the game. And then allies just completely go against that because it's all about building that board state and getting stronger throughout the game.
I think that's a good observation. I do think it's good to have room for alternate gameplay patterns.
Very much so.
Like, yeah, the default is you start strong and expend resources and slowly get weaker throughout the game. And I don't necessarily want every hero to play out that way. But it does seem like a very stark contrast, like you were saying. And allies really have the ability to really dominate and create a really huge board state that can be really overwhelming to a deck that is already like losing power because now we're at that mid game and you might have lost some of your equipment already. Or even blown up from like a Tomotai. Like,
oh my god, yeah.
Yeah, and the way that I think of it, like depending on the hero that is facing against like a Dromai player, for instance, like you can kind of think of every single dragon as gaining life. Like if the average point value is like 2 to 3, like you're gaining 2 health here or 2 to 3 health here, and on top of actual Sigil of Solaces and defense reactions, it can be a little overwhelming. And I will say that, you know, with Flesh and Blood and LSS's commitment to change how action point economy works in FaB 2.0, I think this might be the last like egregious example of like what allies used to be, and like, you know, it'll never be at this power level again, or at least that's what I hope, because I don't think anyone would want to keep dealing with the same like broken formula per se.
Yeah, I think the intention with Dromai was really for that Phantasm to be a not quite a punishment, but like definitely a clear and obvious weak side. This idea of like, if you pop the first dragon, their turn ends. It doesn't matter what other board state they built up. As long as you're always able to pop a dragon and then throw damage at Dromai, you're doing okay. But then Dromai just insta-loses against every single Guardian and Brute. So they gave her tools to deal with what happens when her dragons get popped. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, these other classes that weren't able to have a popper every single turn naturally, now they just cannot deal with it at all because, oh, now Miragai's out, or Chromai's out, or one of the Dusts are down. And it just completely, I think, threw off everything because they had to give Dromai some way of dealing with those super bad matchups, but then it just gave her extra toxic matchups into someone like Riptide, where it's like, yeah, I throw one big arrow a turn. I'm not doing well.
Or too little arrows.
Yeah, it wasn't healthy.
Part of me wonders like how strong Dromai has been this whole time, because it took a long time since her release for Dromai to be seen as a powerful hero. Like there was a long time. I can think of a couple big podcasters especially who would continuously bag on Dromai and claim that she was a very bad hero and she was not nowhere near winning tournaments. But it was mostly these same mechanics that we're talking about that have been around. And maybe we're also a little bit biased because there are a few like really good Dromai players in SoCal that we brush up against every once in a while.
Yeah. And I'll kind of answer that, Fuzzy, because I think in large part it was due to skill expression. Like I think, we've talked about it in previous episodes, especially the one with Anthony Pham, where we talked about like people aren't willing to take risks as much. Like they want a sure bet, so to speak, like as sure as you can get. And Dromai wasn't seen that way for a long time. It took a while to figure out with Icelander being a thing and FaB being a thing. I think she was just kind of like overshadowed for a while. And now the curve has been flattened so much, like with Tome of the Imperial Flame, like it just makes it so much easier to not only get like these 2-3 dragon turns, but these big ass dragons like Tumulti, Optimi, and Dominia. And that is what's making, I feel, is what's making Dromai like way easier to access and way easier to perform well with, because you just have overwhelming board state pressure.
Yeah, and even before that came out, we were seeing Dromai in the meta for easily like 2 big competitive seasons.
For sure.
She is kind of becoming the next Lexi. Never the dominant deck, but always one of the top decks.
Yeah, you have to cater your deck to this specific deck now, I feel. Aside from like the 2 obvious like problem childs of allies, I think the next topic would be like the big shadow allies like Ursa, Blasphemit, and Nazareth.
Yeah, the shadow demons.
Yeah, exactly. And I think these guys are kind of like what I feel would, well, even if it's just shadow or like these, like if another class gets access to a big ally, like these are pretty good examples to work from, because not only are they kind of difficult to make, like Chain was probably the easiest. You play 6 blood debt cards, which was really easy back then. Levia probably being the hardest because you need to have 6 blood debt and you have to play against this like inherently bad mechanic. Nazareth actually is probably the easiest because you just need 6 rune chance, which is pretty easy with your hero ability. But all of these don't really make an impact immediately, and even then it is predicated on the other hero being a light hero.
Yeah. A couple things that I've noticed when I was looking at all the different allies and all the different ways that they show up in Flesh and Blood is that these are one in instant, so you can't recur them with Remembrance like you can with a lot of the dragons or some of the auras. Not all of the auras. A lot of the instant auras are there, but they're instant, so you can't recur them, which means once you play it, you're only getting it once.
Right.
And then also that like lack of immediate board presence and lack of general utility. It is just a 6/6 body that can attack once. Only really against very niche cases will it get any added utility.
Yeah, and even when I've like resolved like a Blasphemit, for instance, against like a Dromai, they just use like all of their dragons that I haven't dealt with yet to kill Blasphemit the next turn. So it essentially functions as like extra block, like gaining 6 life, so to speak. Like especially against decks like Bravo, I think he would really want to kill that, and it's fairly easy to do. So you just swing 2 cards into the Blasphemit and it's dead. So that doesn't feel like very oppressive. And like you said, it's once per turn, so once it's gone, the threat is gone.
Yeah, but still, I mean, it does that thing that's good about allies, which is it takes the opponent's entire turn. They have to use a card on it. You're then left with your nice big full hand.
Right.
And now you get to do what you want. Like, it still gave you a lot of space in that matchup.
For sure. Yeah, and the last example I wanted to bring up is the Angels, which I feel like are the closest like illusionist ally to be balanced, so to speak. Like, when I say balance, I mean like there's multiple ways to deal with them, because all the Angels have Ward 4 specifically. So it acts like a defense reaction, but they also have health. I think they all have like 4 health, if I'm not mistaken. So you can attack into them with like, and 4 is an easy to get to number for most decks. Like even if you spend like a 1 for 5, I think most decks have access to that.
And can we talk about how the only way to get these angel allies is by interacting with the opponent and landing one of these herald cards?
Yes.
I mean, that's not specifically true because you can
can play it natural.
No. Can you?
Yeah, you can just
play a Figment?
Yeah.
Oh, does it like cost 4?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm wrong.
Actual cool thing about those, we talk about how the demon allies are cool because they got the 666 thing going on. These angels have 4. They have 4 4s. Cost 4, ward 4, 4 attack, 4 defense.
Oh, yeah, that's true. But no, I agree with you, Fuzzy, because there's ways to get them on the field without interacting, but it's kind of
Like
slow.
Halo of Illumination is one of them, but it's a
Right.
one-time use.
Right, exactly. So you get like your first herald of the game, and then from there on out, unless you play them, which is really inefficient, I feel. I think
Very inefficient.
I think most Prism players would agree, like slamming down a herald will dominate, or a herald with like the Herald of Triumph, which applies -1 power to all attack action cards defending it, so that it like dances around the phantasm. That's usually like the way that they build up their soul and get these figments out. So just more work overall to get an ally that's easier to deal with, and they still have powerful effects, but they don't last very long, assuming like you deal with them in a regular pace.
I also feel like Ward 4, like as flavor, an ally that will sacrifice himself to stop you from taking damage, I think flavor-wise that can be really powerful. And as a mechanic, like if allies are supposed to extend the game by providing more health points for you to have to deal with, physically blocking my health from taking damage like extends that same idea in a way where it can't be ignored, as well as is really easy to take care of,
Yeah.
Right. And one thing I'll note too is the new Prism has 32 health. So in order to get the same value as a full 40 health hero is to play like 2 of these figments and get enough value to work up to that 40
And get full value from that ward 4, right?
Right.
Because there's always a chance that I just leak in 1 damage, or I get a little bit of an attack reaction in, and that ward 4 only technically blocked 1 damage.
Right.
That's another way that you can balance allies. Like Dromai has so much higher effective health because she's constantly creating these dragons. Prism also has a much higher effective life total, so they balanced it by reducing the life total with the expectation that she's getting so much more life.
Yeah, that in addition to her original like Prism card pool, like with the auras and stuff like that, and the powerful heralds, like all of that still
Has Arclight Sentinel.
Yeah, she still has that. Although all of these cards are no blocks, whereas Dromai, all of her cards block for 3, unless it's like one of the draconic
true.
actions that Fi can use as well.
It's actually kind of really great because I feel like you can almost see a linear learning curve of LSS with allies in the game.
Yeah.
Where they had all those Spectra cards with the original Luminaris, and it's like, oh, this is not tenable. This is not okay. And then, okay, well let's also do these Shadow Demons at the same time. Oh, that ended up not being as good as we thought. All right. Middle ground, Dromai. Oh, still very, very, very good. And now, as they're reprinting Prism, we're seeing them learn from that experience even more, learning what is a healthier place for allies to be. I really like how now I, playing against a Prism, have the choice of whether I go to attack the angel right away or attack the player and try to deal that 1 or 2 chip damage that will actually destroy the angel anyway.
Yeah.
Because when I attack the Prism player, they're going to want to block to keep their angel around because the ally provides power.
Right.
So they're going to still want to block my cards. Versus like Dromai's play pattern, which is like, yeah, you can attack me, but all my dragons are still going to be there regardless. I can block 9, play like a Ravenous Rabble, and then also throw 10 damage worth of dragons at your face.
Yep. And if you don't deal with the first one, you are taking the rest of them, probably.
Yes. So it's very, very frustrating to play against in that sense. But now the Prism player is encouraged to block with cards from hand, and then, oh no, you don't have the resources to attack with your angel anymore. Or you can't attack with the angel and then also get another card into soul by attacking with a
herald.
With a herald.
Yeah.
So like especially with this new Luminaris. This new Luminaris got revealed, and I think everyone is kind of feeling that doom of the original Prism coming back.
For sure.
But when I look at it, I still don't see really efficient 1-card hands. I see 3-card hands and 4-card hands. And that means that as long as I keep pressure up on that Prism player, it's not going to be as easy for them to take advantage of it the way that the original Prism did with her Spectra.
For sure. Yeah, there's definitely a lot more moving pieces that Prism needs to get him going. And I don't think she'll translate as well like in the Metascape after Dromai leaves, because right now that's like an auto loss scenario for Prism. So I'd be interested in seeing like how we can evolve around this new Prism and then see like how oppressive it actually is. So with all this being said, we did just see Kasai get the ability to create warrior allies, and I think like this is really where LSS is going to start cooking, because not only are they hard to make, like you have to destroy gold on the same turn that you create them, so you need to like stockpile these golds instead of cracking them per turn. But you also have to already attack with a sword with Go Again in order to make these little allies attack, and it costs a resource to attack with each one. Now, I don't know if there's going to be like a card that replaces the chest piece for warrior already that, you know, reduces the cost for ally attacks, but the fact that it takes more resources or more valuable resources to make these, and they're more difficult to use, makes me really excited about, you know, where this design space is going. But I want to ask you guys, is this a playstyle we should see more of?
I like the balancing measures that LSS is putting in. Like, you can only attack with the Centauri Cell Swords if you've attacked with a weapon this turn, which we kind of saw with Dromai, where as long as you've played a red card, all the dragons get Go Again, which is kind of a big deal. Like, they at least have to fulfill a requirement on their turn, but giving them all Go Again when none of them actually cost any resources was a big floodgate that opened up with that one requirement that was
Right.
pretty easy to fulfill anyway, since she's already rewarded with running so many reds, period. But I like the idea of this requirement where the allies you need to check a box before you take all their value. It also costs resources to swing with the Centauri Cell Sword, so even if you have a whole lot of them, you might not feasibly have enough cards to attack with all of them. And you still have to find a way to give your weapon Go Again. I don't think any warrior weapons right now have Go Again naturally. Quicksilver Dagger's like the closest we get.
Right.
And it costs the gold tokens to make them. So there's a lot of like boxes you need to tick in order to get this sweet reward of the allies, and they can always be attacked to be cleared out. They have 2 health, which is not that much of a hurdle. And it's a specialization, so I mean,
There's only 3 of them.
right, there's only 3 of them in the deck. So I like the direction. There's a lot more balancing measures going on. I would be pretty happy with seeing more allies in the future if it looked like this.
So one of our executive producer Talon was kind of upset when this got released, because even though like we see the full scope of, or we're studying the full scope of allies and like the evolution of how it's being balanced, like should we see more allies being printed? Like, is this like a good playstyle we should work around in more classes, or is this something we should kind of like, okay, this was cool, Centauri Sabers, you know, you or Centauri Cell Swords, you give them gold, they fight for you, that's cool. Is this the end of it? Like, do we have more Dragon Ladies in the future? Like, what does it look like? And I think, Clark, you have some ideas ready for us about, like, what allies could be in the future, right?
Yeah, so for Yellow Pitch, I want to talk about what should, like, healthy allies look like. And I really like that transition point. I actually had that point a little bit later in my notes, but let's move it up here.
Sure.
I think if allies are going to be a bigger part of the game, if they're going to be expanded to more classes, more heroes need to be given specific tools to deal with allies, period mark. Especially those that are already struggling.
Right.
If you're going to look at Dromai and say, okay, Dromai has an auto-lose matchup into people that are running Phantasm, and so you gave her Miragai and Chromai and the Dusts and the Tomes, and it's like, okay, you need to do that for other classes too. Other classes, you need to realize, have an auto-lose matchup into somebody and give them a tool for that.
Right.
We've talked about sort of hate cards and like what is the role of generic in that. I'm not sure if I would like to see a generic card that deals with allies, but I would definitely like to see maybe a ranger card or what would be another class that really, really struggles with illusionist?
I would say certain kinds of warriors. Like, I know a lot of people were dooming, like, people who were, like, predominantly Dorinthia players, like, really do not like the idea of Prism coming back because ALS kind of, like, hoses everything that warrior wants to do. Because the second attack of any warrior is usually going to be the more impactful. Like, that's how you build Dorinthia. Dawnblade counters, that's how you get the bigger attack with Kasai. Bolton usually has, like, a small attack up front and then like raid in and then XYZ attack afterwards. So
you think warriors should maybe have some specific tools to combat allies?
yeah, they already have cleave, which is like axe specific, but we don't have any heroes that really care about that just yet.
Too specific.
Right.
Something more class general, applicable to anybody in that class.
I believe Assassin is in that boat right now.
Oh, for sure.
Assassin's kind of being gatekept by Dromai right now.
For sure.
Especially Arachne. I think Azuri has the poppers, has daggers that they can throw. Like, they have the tools, but it's certainly not easy for them.
Yeah.
So I think that's like the first thing is one, just say, hey, allies are going to be a thing moving forward. And because it is because it pushes matchups from that like 40 to 60 range into the 20 to 80 range, I think you need to just start printing tools and say, look, we know that this is going to be something that just kind of breaks the game a little bit. And so we are going to be printing specific tools regularly for the classes that struggle with it. Just from the start, I think LSS needs to acknowledge that. I think we also need ways of dealing with allies without having to sacrifice our own turn. So like playing against allies on the other side of the table, I need to be able to not have to lose my entire turn to like clear the board of allies just for you to build it back up again and also attack me.
Right.
That's not very feasible. I'm not playing the game at that point. I'm just trying to keep your board empty. And that's not fun. That's not a lot of enjoyment in that. We're not interacting anymore, which is what Flesh and Blood is supposed to be about. So I think we noticed this great with Ward. And we saw it. They tried it with Phantasm. Again, I think they gave too many tools to work around Phantasm.
Even Phantasm itself, I still feel like doesn't quite accomplish what it seems like it would. Where like if you have 6 power cards, then you're winning, you know? It feels like that should be the weakness, is the classes with 6 power cards. But like you said, Azuri has plenty. Azuri cannot beat Dromai easily.
Yeah, but it was definitely the right idea. We need these things that allow us to interact more with the allies and allow us to destroy them, which I would say Kasai Centauri sellswords do not have.
Yeah,
they are just 3/2s that sit on the board. So I think there is maybe a little bit of danger in that, but the fact that it's just a specialization card that required that for it to really have that kind of long-lasting power, you need to build up a lot of resources. You need to already be winning throughout the game. I think there's some play in that.
That would be really funny if like a month from now, Kasai is so considered to be really strong, and people are getting all these PTSD flashbacks from having shit tons of dragons on the board. They're like, oh, there's 5 Centauri sellswords. I can't even pop them with Phantasm. They all have go again for free. They only cost 1 resource. Like,
though I will say, all these Centauri sellswords are predicated largely through Kasai's hero ability, which requires not only 4 cards in graveyard to banish, but you need to also hit that turn.
Or a money where your mouth is with some attack reaction.
Sure, yeah. There's going to be some cool wager effects, but I think largely if you just know how to play against Warrior a little bit better, or more efficiently, I should say, then you would be able to interact with these Centauri sellswords way more than you would dragons, where
it's a lot harder to make gold than Ash.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly where I was going with that.
Yeah. I also want to note that there's a lot of different places for this counterplay. This ally counterplay of like, what can I, the player across the table from the allies, do to stop allies from happening? So I already wanted to note that we kind of already toyed around with this a little bit in our Necromancer design. Joel, when you designed your ally-based Necromancer, you had the Spectre keyword, which was a way of destroying the ally while blocking or attacking with it, right?
Yeah.
It's basically like when it's overblocked, it's destroyed.
Yeah, I remember that being like instead of an attack value defense system like Phantasm, it would be something like if you have greater defense, like similar to is it Zephyr Needle that Benji uses, like his little daggers. So if you have a card, or if you defend with a card with greater defense than the attack value, then it destroys itself at end of combat, as a way of like that specifically. Like if you can, defend yourself against like a skeleton, then it like crumbles or whatever. There's something more flavorful with it, but all of that being said, like if you were able to defend well against like attack action cards, then you'd be able to do well against the allies as well. And that was like a way of interacting with allies that we haven't seen, just yet.
Yeah. But I think there's all sorts of things that we do requiring the attacking player to deal enough damage. So it's like, yeah, if I full block out, your allies will destroy themselves at end of turn. Or if I am able to take the damage for turn and then put too much pressure on you and you don't attack with your allies, like you can't pay that one to swing with your sellsword, okay, they leave. Or like if you don't create a gold every turn, they're like, what are you paying us with? And then they all leave the field.
That's actually really funny.
Yeah, little ideas like that. Just something that says, you now need to meet this condition. You need to keep winning. And if I can interrupt that somehow, if I can bring that interplay back into the game, your allies' powers go down. And whether they get fully removed, get attack reduced, get health reduced, I don't know exactly what it looks like. But just this idea of, if I am able to play well on my side of the table, I can interact with your allies, is a very necessary thing.
For sure. And that goes with the core philosophy of Flesh and Blood too, because it kind of implies that this is like a mid-game strategy where, okay, I have life to spare, so I'm going to take this hit and still swing with my allies, get as much board pressure as I can. And then in the late game, when things get a little bit dicier, I can't stop blocking as much. Then I have to like choose which allies I keep and which ones have to go because I'm not able to capitalize on them being on the field, right?
Yeah. I also wanted to mention they shouldn't have easy go again. Both Dromai and OG Prism had 0 cost attacks that were super cheap and did not require much to give them all go again. And now we see, even with the new Luminaris, you're not really able to make full use of that on like 2 card hands. You're going to need 3 card hands. You're going to need more going on. You're not going to be able to now block 9, block 10, play a card, and then attack for a bunch.
Right.
That is no longer going to be the feature, because I think that gave way too much defensive power when you built up your allies, on top of the allies, like you mentioned, Joel, already kind of being a way of gaining health. So requiring the player with the allies to have more cards in hand, to do more, to get them flowing and working and operating, I think that's a very necessary and healthy thing to do. I also think, and this is probably like the most negative take I'm going to have in this episode, I think the summoner archetype is absolutely garbage and does not belong in Flesh and Blood. I don't want to see 10 allies across the table. That is not healthy in any way, shape, or form, because our attacks are single target. So many attacks are single target. And like this idea of a summoner, it just doesn't work. If what I think is better is if we went to the roots, which is Flesh and Blood as a fighting game. I love the fighting game analogy. I'm still working on my like 2-hour presentation, 100 page long spreadsheet, right? Or not spreadsheet, PowerPoint. Yeah, like 100-page PowerPoint on Flesh and Blood as a fighting game. But in fighting games, you don't see the summoner archetype. That's not what they do there. What they do is the puppet master. So the puppet master is this archetype that relies a lot on complexity. It's very hard to put your ally in the right position to give yourself the combos that you need to deal the ridiculous damage. And the opponent always has the way of playing around it, hitting the ally to destroy it, which then leaves the puppet master character underpowered because so much of their power was put into their ally. That's what we need to see. We need to see 1 or 2 allies with a lot of power that I can then clear from the board and keep you underpowered. So this idea of underrate without the ally, overrate with the ally.
So it almost sounds like, Clark, you want like 1 or 2 allies, but to have those 1 to 2 allies be recurable, you know?
Yes.
Like in a sense, like, okay, like let's say if it's a dragon, right? And I'm building ash and I like transform X amount of ash to create, like maybe it's like modal, right? Like, so like if I, spend 5 ash and a certain amount of resources, then it turns it into tumultite. If I spend less, it turns into like a regular ash swing, right? Something where it's a little bit modal, but still interactable on the opponent's part.
Yes, very much so. I think it's a lot. It just fits more with what Flesh and Blood is trying to do. I think it's a little bit closer to the roots of what Flesh and Blood was supposed to be about. This summoner archetype of like massive go wide ally strategies, I don't think it's working. Let's try some go tall strategies.
Yeah.
1 big ally. Hell, let me block for the ally. I'm all right with that.
Yeah.
But now I'm sacrificing my cards to protect the thing on board. Like, I think there's some interesting interplay that can happen here
For sure.
that I would really like to see because, yeah, this like 10 little fucking 1 attack, 2 attack guys, it's not fun.
Yeah, cute. It was a cute idea, but the execution just wasn't there.
Dromai does seem very badass
Yep.
and pretty. And like it's the closest thing we have to like a deep magic like user, whereas
Yeah.
Flesh and Blood is very like melee focused. Like it's not a very magic heavy game, and I know when I'm playing RPGs my favorite thing is the magic users, so like Dromai does fit that niche really well. But I can see what you're saying, Clark, about having lots and lots of little allies is, I don't know if I would use the word incompatible, but I'm close to being convinced that like incompatible is the right way to think about it. I don't think Dromai is that far away from being a good, playable, healthy hero, but
Like if they did Uprising 2.0 and just banned all the OG dragons, just made new ones, I think that would like legitimately be
no,
a good
I
idea.
I would soft disagree. I think if you just made the weapon like give all the dragons the ability to attack, but they cost 1 resource, that would be a lot closer to being balanced because you still have to spend cards from your hand in order to swing with all of them.
Right, and then Flame Scale becomes like a better card, and you have to like manage your resources better. You can't just like block 9, send 15 dragons.
Or like if you could only create 1 ash per turn with a hero
Yeah,
ability rather
sure.
than every single time you pitched a red card. That way, like,
Or you can't have more than 5 allies.
yeah.
Yeah.
In anything like that, I think would do a good job of preventing that suffocation feeling.
Yeah, yeah. God,
Yeah.
that's such a good word for it too.
So those have been my ideas. Obviously, I don't want to talk too much because we have our blue pitch where we're going to get into some of these interesting ideas of what allies can look like for different classes. What sort of aesthetics they can take on for other classes.
Yeah, for Blue Pitch today, I wanted to talk about some custom ally designs that might get your brain juices rolling.
There you go.
That's what brain juices do. They roll when they're feeling inspired. To start things off, while we were working through this episode in the notes, it started off with like a couple different conversations. One of them being like Clark was in the passenger seat of my car and we were driving to an armory and he was like, listen, wizard familiars. And he like wrote up a bunch of ideas and they were really nice. So I picked a couple of my favorites and codified them into a couple allies here. I'm imagining these wizard allies as not having an attack value. They would get you value in other ways. That's something that we're really used to seeing in Wizard right now anyways. Like none of Wizard's cards are attack cards. They are all non-attack actions technically, but they can deal a lot of damage in other ways. This first one is an owl familiar.
Aw.
It's a pretty classic familiar, right? Again, this is basically I ripped this idea from Clark's notes, and I was imagining it would have like 2 health, and it would have an effect to give both heroes 1 intellect. An owl that gives you intellect, I think, had a lot of flavor, and it only giving you intellect sounds really hard to balance. But giving both players +1 hand size sounds a little bit fair and balanced. Maybe even like a symmetric effect that can be broken depending on how you build your deck. But it plays into a lot of interesting dynamics that I think would be fun to play out.
Wait, so Bolton gets 4 intellect? Let's go!
And I said, I want this owl to be able to look into your opponent's hand. So I said your opponent has to play with their hand revealed. And when you have extra cards in your hand, that's even more knowledge that you get to look into. So you get to look at 5 cards in their hand, not just 4. So does that sound fun to you guys?
Actually sounds pretty cool, and it keeps my arsenal still hidden, which is awesome.
That's true. Can't see what's in their arsenal.
Yeah, I love my little owl design. I think when I had it, it was just that the owl let me peek at the opponent's hand. This is definitely a bit bumped up from that, but it's totally doable. Just got to increase the cost.
If they want to have their hand hidden, they have to attack the owl again.
And it very much fits the archetype of like the wizard being real lonely and creating like familiars for himself to hang out with, but they also help him in battle.
Yeah, yeah. I also combined a couple of Clark's ideas for like an elemental. I'm imagining like a fire elemental that only has 1 health. It's kind of delicate, but it has 2 effects. First, you can spend 2 resources as an instant to give your next action card that deals arcane an extra 1 arcane damage. This is a common effect that we see in a couple wizard ideas already. This one is costing 2 resources, but even though it's only giving 1 extra arcane, with Wizard, when you have a lot of these effects, especially if they don't go away like Metacarpus Nodes does, it can allow you to get over Arcane Barrier and hit critical on hits like
Sonic Boom.
Sonic Boom is probably the best example, where like 1 extra damage on Sonic Boom getting over Arcane Barrier is not just 1 extra damage, it's also whatever the heck you find on top with it. So I think 2 resources is pretty fair for that.
Or even the Surge cards, right? All of them are trying to get over that little amount. And what people are currently using them, like, I don't think anyone's actually using the Surge cards because it's just not as good as combo Kano.
They do like the 2 for 5 like Swell Tidings or
They're not played for their surge effects.
yeah. It's just the rate, I think.
This would let you play more into that.
I also gave it the ability to sacrifice itself along with another fire elemental to gain a resource. If you can stack up multiple of these, they're kind of like soft E-pots.
Oh.
Yeah.
So you could use the ability to pump an arcane effect and then sacrifice them to get the resources in order to play the effect, potentially.
Ah, so then it turns into like a little crucible of Aetherweave.
Yeah. This is also when like I designed it, I was thinking, hey, I can sacrifice the allies for value, right? So that yes, I can build them up over time, and if you're concerned about that opponent, you can go ahead and spend your actions and your attacks taking them out, so that I don't have that value later.
It's kind of like a more fair E-pot.
Yeah.
Like, E-pot sits on the field and can't be attacked. It's just there until Kano wants to use it. This is kind of like that, where it's less value than an E-pot, but it's more interactive. You could probably ignore this and be okay, as long as you can deal with the threat that eventually comes out. So those are my 2 little ideas for Wizard. We're all really more like Clark's ideas.
Oh, can I add one more thing?
Sure.
My section was short, so I'm taking more of this little beginning part. I had mentioned at the beginning of my yellow pitch that I think it's very important that the opponents have a way of interacting with these allies outside of just attacking them. So in my initial idea, it was that the Wizard had to deal arcane damage in a turn to keep them around on their turn. So this was definitely obviously for not Kano. This is not allies intended for Kano. This is allies intended for some other design that actually encourages the Wizard to do things on their turn with their action point, other than just, oh, let me just stack up this board value so that I can combo even better than Kano. It's more like, no, you need to consistently be doing things. You can't block 12 and pass.
Yeah, it sounds like a mid-range wizard would... Well, I guess Isona could be considered that too, but it just sounds like it leans towards a more balanced wizard design space.
Yeah. And if you ever throw too many on hits or too much damage at the wizard that they want to block, all right, you lose your allies because of that.
And like a real wizard would probably be channeling a certain amount of energy to keep these familiars up anyway, so that's very flavorful to me as well.
The next idea I had was for a potential guardian ally, and I liked the idea of an ally that would destroy itself when it attacks, because like being able to attack with the same ally over and over again is the traditional way that you really get value for it, right? That's like how you get value out of your creatures in Magic the Gathering. The more you attack with them, the more damage you're getting out. Flesh and Blood is such a linear numbers game that being able to break that linear pattern with allies is where you get a lot of the value. So I'm like, okay, what if this version of this ally does not get value when it attacks over and over again, because it can only attack once. But if you choose to sit on it, it could potentially grow to become stronger and stronger. So your opponent is watching this ally grow over time, and he can destroy it, he or she can destroy it whenever they want to. But until then, it'll grow up into a stronger and stronger ally. So I liked that fitting with the Guardian game plan. Guardians are already more of a late game hero, and I tried to imagine like what ally a Guardian might have, and I like this idea of like a horse, like a trusty steed that grows up with you.
Yeah, very Guardian, right? The White Knight on the horse.
Yeah.
Chivalry, protecting the realm.
Yeah, Brevent would totally have one
I
of
was
these.
just gonna say, yeah. Sacrifice 3 chivalry, create a horse.
Because chivalries have the protect keyword that let them block for, could they block for their ally?
Yo.
I don't think it works like that.
It doesn't, but can it?
It should.
We can just say that it does.
The first way you can block with an ally, that'd be kind of cool.
Block for an ally, yeah.
So you would create a foal which I'm imagining would have like maybe 1 health and 3 attack, and you could pay 2 resources to attack with the foal right away. If you attack with the foal, you're attacking for 3. It has go again and destroys itself at the end of combat. So 2 for 3, 1 time. Or if you pass your turn without attacking with the foal, it'll sit exposed, and if the foal does not get attacked until your next turn, it'll destroy itself and become a courageous colt with 3 health and 5 attack. You can either attack with it 2 for 5, go again, or it'll be sitting there on the field ready to be attacked with 3 health until your next turn, where it becomes a brawny bronco. Like the Bronco's got lots of brawn. He's really strong, brawny Bronco.
Nice and muscular.
Sounds like a tough horse.
With 5 health and 7 attack. So you could do 2 for 7, go again, or again, pass your turn, wait for the brawny Bronco to grow up into a stalwart stallion with 7 health and 9 attack. And I wanted there to be an endpoint where, like, okay, Guardian, you've sat on this horse for that long. It's getting stronger and stronger. You either got to use it or lose it. So if you pass your turn without attacking with the stalwart stallion and it still survives until your next turn, I have it giving the effect of destroying itself to gain 4 life, which is like not a small amount of life, really. That could be really strong, considering that like you made this foal like 5 turns ago and now you're getting like 4 life. Like if you survive that long and your horse survived that long, that 4 life is probably really powerful.
Right.
Not nearly as powerful though as swinging for 9. So you probably want to attack with the stalwart stallion when it comes up, and maybe your opponent can strip cards out of your hand so you lose the opportunity. But or they could attack the stalwart stallion at any point along the way to get rid of it. So that was the idea for Guardian. Do you guys kind of like that direction for allies?
I fucking love this idea, honestly. So Clark also had an idea back in our old him LL video episode about this like epochal like guardian that like every time he plays the same action it gets stronger and stronger, and I really resonated with that because I like playing guardian. I like the long grindy games, and this really speaks to me too. Because it's a little full. You gotta, you gotta nurture it. Falls are very like horses, from what I understand, are very like fragile creatures IRL. Like if it breaks,
oh my god, yeah.
Like you stub its toe, you gotta kill it or something like that. And like after it runs one race, you gotta kill it or something. Like I just always hear horses dying. But so like the fact that it grows into this like behemoth of a horse attacking for 9 or gaining me 4 health. That just sounds like a really cool, like adjacent way of playing Guardian that I think would be really easy to slot. Like, I think Guardian lists are very tight as it is. So just having like one way of, nurturing this, or even if it's like, replacing your weapon, like you spend like maybe like 4 resources to create this or something to kind of deviate away from like what Guardian already does. Like, it just sounds really cool to me.
I feel like Guardian would kill for 2 for 3 with go again. In their weapon slot. Like even if that was just it alone and they never let it level up.
Right.
But it leveling up is still nice. I think being able to block with like any card with the protect keyword on it is actually super, super cool because you can protect your horse so that it can get nice and big and strong, and then you can attack with it.
Yeah, but that would just be like, I think the reason why LSS hasn't printed those cards right now is because, like, if I'm already spending cards to attack the ally or resources or, God forbid, both in order to try to get rid of this ally, and then you play an instant that blocks the damage.
But how many things could have protect, really, right? I mean, I know we have the equipment suite, but that equipment suite still gives value to the opposing player. Even when you block and defense for it. So I feel like if they
you want to have like a different siloed mechanic in order to do it.
Yeah, if they really limited the amount of protect cards that were printed, because right now Brevant is the only one that can run any amount of chivalry. Like, yes, there is a Brevant deck that runs 60 chivalry and this one ally as a weapon, right? Like, that is a build that exists out there.
Well, I wasn't picturing this ally originally as being like a weapon, right? Or having a weapon that makes the horse tokens.
Sure.
But I was imagining like one action card that might make multiple horses.
Oh.
So I make one horse that makes 2 or 3 foals, and not all of them are going to live to become a stalwart stallion, or maybe, but like you kind of want to juggle as your opponent. Like, do I want to let all of these grow up, or do I want to like take care of one or two of them, or maybe I'm just going to focus on putting pressure so you can't attack with them.
Actually, can I just say I would love that for dragons. Like if that's what Dromai ends up looking like after she LLs.
Yeah,
like you create 3 Aether Ashwings, but then they become new dragons.
See, that's interesting
turn by
too.
turn.
Yeah, that's really what the direction Allies should take. I really love this, growing up mechanic.
But I know how crazy it is just to make 3 Aether Ashwings. That can feel like a really strong turn when you time it right. So making 3 things that are essentially stronger Aether Ashwings, like I can recognize how strong and crazy that would be. You'd have to really invest a lot of resources into an action card like that. But I think like the amount of gameplay, like the kind of gameplay pattern where you make a bunch of these could be really interesting, as long as it's expensive and like potentially there are other ways to deal with them.
Yeah.
And they're all one-time use, so that's the worst you could get out of it, right?
Right.
Is they will go away eventually if you ignore them
Yeah.
or get a strong enough life lead. My last idea that I wanted to share is a mechanologist ally.
Okay.
I felt like I had to do a mechanologist one because there's a lot of mechanologist fans listening out there, Han. And there has been, when we were talking about allies in the Discord, which is part of what spawned us wanting to talk about allies as an episode today, mechanologist was brought up. So I feel like I have to do this for the fans,
Oh yeah, this is technically our first fan request
That's
from our
true.
Discord.
Yeah.
So you're welcome, Discord members. This is our gift to you.
I just have one idea here, and that's allies that when you have to scrap in order to attack with them. Like we have scrap cards already from Bright Lights where you banish an item or equipment from your graveyard in order to fuel the card and give it an extra effect. And I like the idea of allies that you have to scrap in order to attack with them. They might be really big, but if you like, I have this T-Rex here, and of course I spelled Rex like WRECKS.
That
like
is
it wrecks
so-
stuff up.
I love that so much.
I can't be the first one that's done that.
Yeah,
I might
yeah.
have stolen it.
Adorable.
I'm imagining it like having like 5 health, 6 attack. We're talking something big, kind of like Dromai's Tumultai
or a T-Rex.
or like an actual T-Rex, yeah. But made out of robot parts and scrapped together.
Yeah.
And in order to attack with it, you have to pitch a blue and scrap 3 cards from your graveyard. It might be hard to get that many items and equipment into your graveyard. In Bright Lights Limited, like it was certainly possible to like get 3 or 6 or 9 scrap cards into the graveyard, but you kind of had to work for it a little bit, and not every deck could do it. So having these allies could be a payoff for running lots of items or Evo equipment cards.
I like it. I like it because it has a very high requirement to do something with it, which is another great way of balancing allies. I'm not quite sure if I would. What's the way I want to phrase this? I'll say the mean way that was just right off the top of my head, and then we can like workshop a nicer way of saying it. I think there are more fun ways of building allies in mechanologists.
Okay, yeah,
like
yeah.
when we think about mechanologists as like they are able to construct little gremlins to go out and fight for them.
I would even argue there are more fun ways to build allies in Mechanologist already in the form of Nitromechanoid and Teklovosin Singularity.
Yes.
Like, those aren't, like, literally allies, but they kind of are pseudo-allies where, like, they affect the board permanently. They give you some regular source of damage. Kind of like they're upgrading a weapon. But you wouldn't really call weapons allies in the same way, right?
Yeah.
But they kind of, like, toe the line. So I did like the idea of, like, scrapping together allies.
Yes.
But I was kind of a little bit low on time, and I wanted to throw something together, so I kind of turned that into like scrapping in order to fuel it, in order to attack.
Yeah, I like the idea of maybe an action card that has scrap of certain number, and then those cards then become the material that allows so many attacks.
Oh yeah,
Right?
That could be really cool. Fueling it in a different way, right?
Yeah.
Like banish X cards from under this in order to attack, and the read that you created T-Rex is by scrapping 8 cards together or something.
Or even like let's return maybe to my Puppet Master idea of the a very fun archetype that I love in a lot of shows is the like robot boxer,
Yeah.
right? And so the hero is the person who makes it. It's his little guy. And so every turn he can scrap to put another card under it that maybe pumps its attack, pumps its defense, and also maybe makes it a little bit hardier. Like if this takes 3 or more damage, remove one of the cards that's underneath it. right? But then to attack, you also need to remove a card underneath it. So you're constantly looking for ways of like scrapping and getting cards underneath your boxer to keep it on the field. But if I attack it enough times or attack you enough times, eventually that robot boxer is going to fall apart.
So it sounds like what Flesh and Blood needs next is one set where there's 4 heroes like the Welcome to Wraith and Arcane Rising, but the caveat is each of the heroes have like a fat ally that they build over the course of the game.
Yeah.
The Guardian with the horse, Mechanologist with the Mecha Puppy or T-Rex or whatever, and like 2 other heroes that, you know, create like a big ally. And that just creates like the premier way of, you know, making allies.
I'm digging it. When I kind of first started this podcast, I was really excited at the idea of like continuously shouting out the stuff that people were engaging with the episode, but we kind of need a follower base to do that. We're just getting to the point where I can actually say things like, hey, I want to hear what everyone thinks and talk about it on the show. So to kind of start that, I have a little bit of a prompt for you all. I'm really interested to hear what you guys have.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure that you're just on the edge of your seat. You're like, ooh, fuzzy, fuzzy, fuzzy. I really have this cool idea for an ally in Flesh and Blood, because we're used to playing trading card games that have cards sitting out on the board, right? Maybe think of your favorite effects from other trading card games that you think would port over relatively well. Maybe think of some allies that you wouldn't mind playing against because they sound like really fun, interesting, or engaging effects. Maybe allies that have a cool condition to get rid of them if you're the opponent, or allies that have a strong temporary effect, or maybe just something that's really sick and flavorful that you have floating around in your head. We really want to know. If you tell me your ideas on Discord or as a YouTube comment or send it to our email, I will shout it out in a future Turn Zero, and I will tell the world about your ideas. The entire internet will hear about it.
And I'm going to add a caveat. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. It's a free country. But if you're going to submit like a design, let's try and do like for a class that doesn't already have allies to keep it a little spicy. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah.
Bonus points for that for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for sharing your designs with us, Fuzzy. I think a lot of them like kind of exceeded my expectations for what allies could look like. The wizards I think are flavorful, but really what excited me the most was like the Guardian and the big Mechanologist T-Rex. That was really cool.
Yeah, the level up, I think, is a very clean design for allies.
For sure.
Should we move on to our Arsenal Zone?
That sounds
Yes.
good to me.
So, for those of you who do not know, our Arsenal Zone is a little section at the end of the podcast where we like to take a moment to talk about some cards we've been thinking about, whether they're good or they're bad, or we're just flipping through our chaff and we just go, what? This is a card? Sorry, that was my best Joel impression.
It just sounded like you.
And so, why don't we go ahead and get started with Joel? What card do you have for us?
Oh, all right. Well, recently, I don't know why, but it's something I've been really enjoying in our Discord. We saw a tweet from James White saying that, you know, because a new brew got revealed today, and sort of the tweet that like preceded the reveal was, something to the effect of like, oh, let's rock and roll or whatever. But rock was spelled R-O-K, as in rock, the Marvel weapon that can't be used by anybody. And so I was freaking out about it and like, shit posting in our Discord, and everyone was like, let's go, rock support.
Everyone wants rock to be cool.
Yeah. And
everybody wants rock to be cool.
Yeah. And so it was just funny seeing all the rock like emojis and people just saying rock with no other context. It just makes me really like unbelievably happy. I don't know why. So I was just thinking about rock. And also there was a card spoiled today. Look it up real quick.
While you do, I love that brew players really embody that brain empty mentality. We're really like, rock. That's what it's about, baby.
It's called Bonebreaker Bellow.
Yeah. So Bonebreaker Bellow just got spoiled by LSS today, and it says your next brute attack gets +3, and if you've beaten your chest this turn, you gets +5 instead. And it costs. That's exactly what I had in mind. So it costs 1, which means off of a blue, like basically any non-attack that buffs a brute attack that costs 1 can be paid with a blue and then a tunic resource to then swing with rock for 7 plus whatever, and it can't be prevented.
Oh, and one of the talismans. There's a talisman that can also reduce activating rock by 1.
Talisman of Ignition, or you could do like
Epot.
Yeah, Epot Tunic. So there's a lot of ways to like get it to work, but I think like we're slowly getting to a critical mass of cards where rock is like a viable
Rock's
weapon.
gonna be valid, bro.
Oh,
one of
yeah,
these days,
buddy.
it's gonna be rock time.
If not Heavy Hitters 1, Heavy Hitters 2 or 3. It's gonna get there. But yeah, that's the card I was thinking about. Shout out to the Discord peeps that indulged my shit posting. Mm-hmm. How about you, Clark?
The card that I've been thinking about is Beacon of Victory. So
Whoa, what?
I know. I finally went to an arsenal for the first time in a long time because I have a job and money and I no longer have anxiety about everything anymore. And I still don't have a CC deck because I haven't gotten around to sitting down and actually buying cards to build my deck back up. So I just said, hey, Han, bring me a deck. And he goes, what deck would you like? And I go, surprise me.
Han is so good for that.
He's great for that. He just shows up with a Bolton deck from last meta. Right, it has a bunch of blues to deal with Icelander in it, and you know right before the first match, I'm desperately trying to figure out this deck, what my 60 is going to be. I end up winning the armory, and primarily because of Beacon of Victory. Beacon of Victory sits very similarly to Teklo Core for me, and if you remember my big impassioned speech about Teklo Core, it is a fair card that doesn't feel fair. And playing Beacon of Victory didn't feel fair.
Bacon is crazy.
Oh, I was playing a 0 cost +5 go get the most powerful card in my deck, which I can then cast at instant speed and swing twice with my fucking insane how much value a 0 cost attack reaction gave me. I had a double Beacon of Victory into a double Lumina turn to end out one of the games against a Fatigue Riptide. Like, it was crazy.
And all this power can be yours for the low cost of 3 intellect.
So Beacon of Victory, it's a really, really cracked card. I really love it. It is fair, but it just doesn't feel fair. And sometimes that's a lot of fun to play with. So I'm really shouting out Beacon of Victory. I love it. I appreciate that Bolton has great stuff like that.
Nice.
So for my card shout out today, I really wanted to shout out Talon Stradley, our executive producer.
Let's go.
He's not a card. Wait a minute. Pull up February now.
I have a card. But Talon's been working like nonstop on how he can make Riptide viable. And through that, he's been working on like Fatigue Riptide. He's really well known for it. I feel like I don't really need to mention too much because we've talked about it in the podcast before. But like he's been posting articles on the Wrath Times, which feels like the realest website that the community has right now. And in his Fatigue Riptide article, he opens it with like the entire idea for Riptide Fatigue is how can I run 9 salvage shots and make it viable? So I've got 2 red salvage shots here that I'm going to sign and give to you 2.
Nice. That'll be perfect for my 1 arrow Riptide list.
Which, of course, you're making now.
Fuck. I'm editing all this out.
1 for you and 1 for you.
Thank you, Fuzzy.
Thank you, Fuzz.
Nice.
And that's my card shout out is Salvage Shot. Also, it's a pretty cool card. I love those things that go on the bottom of their deck and allow you to hit fatigue. It doesn't seem like an effect that you have to block, but then suddenly, like, he has cards in his deck.
You're like,
and you
wait
don't.
a minute, you have 4 salvage shots, you fucking cheater?
It's the same one 4 times. I think that about wraps up our show. Thanks for podding with me, boys.
Yeah, thanks so much for listening, guys, and shout out to the Discord for inspiring us to make an episode on allies.
Don't forget to post your favorite custom ally designs.
Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Pitch It To Me podcast is hosted by Fuzzy Delp, Clark Moore, and Joel Recinos. Our executive producer is Talon Stradley. Logistics coordinator, John Farkas. Music by Dillon Hulse. Logo by Han V. And sound mixing by Christopher Moore. Last but not least, we'd like to thank you, the listener. Thank you for tuning in. Please give us a follow on your favorite social media platform at Pitch It To Me Podcast.